Before the world was divided by blade and fire, before Asgard stood tall above the 9 realms, there was Vanaheim, a realm of ancient song and deep, fertile earth. Here rivers glided through misty valleys, and trees whispered the secrets of life itself. From this place, unburdened by the harsh steel of war, came a light not of the sun, but of soul. Her name was Freya. She was not born from thunder like Thor, nor carved from silence like hell. Freya came forth as a shimmer in the fog, her golden hair glinting like fire wrapped in silk, her eyes twin pools of storm and peace. She was beauty, but not the kind that wilts beneath praise. Her beauty had teeth. It breathed it, burned it, bled. For she was not just goddess of love, she was desire given form, yearning wrapped in grace, battle dressed in silk. From the Vanir she came, and the Vanir were not like the Aesir. They did not build their power in sky fortresses or roar across battlefields. The Vanir grew things. They whispered to seed and root. Their magic was old, older even than the rage of giants or the cold of Niflheim. Freya learned this magic from her mother before she ever knew the shape of war. She sang to flowers and made them bloom. She danced with starlight and shaped it into charms. Her breath brought beasts to stillness. Her touch turned night into longing. And yet Vanaheim was not eternal. Peace is a season, not a sentence. The war between the Aesir and the Vanir came like all wars do, too suddenly to stop and too slowly to understand. The gods of Asgard feared the Vanir's secrets. The Vanir resented the Aesir's pride. Arrows sang where there had once been trade. Blood spilled into the rivers where gold had once been gifted. Freya did not stand aside. Though she wore beauty like armor, she also carried blades beneath her smile. She rode into battle on a chariot, pulled by cats wild and fierce, their eyes mirroring her own. She fought not with brute force, but with enchantments that twisted the hearts of warriors and shattered resolve. Her magic was seiðr, ancient, forbidden, powerful. It bent the mind, blurred time, and made fate tremble. And when the war ended, when the gods exhausted and wounded called for peace, it was Freya they chose as their offering. To seal the truce between Aesir and Vanir, Freya, her father Njord and her brother Freya were sent to Asgard. They were not prisoners, they were gifts. But gifts can bind more tightly than chains. She entered Asgard like dawn entering a darkened hall. The Aesir turned to look and kept looking. Odin, wise and cold, studied her with the eyes of a raven. Thor, mighty and proud, tilted his head in respect. Loki, sly and silver-tongued, smiled a little too widely. They did not know her. Not yet. Freya took her place among them, not as a guest, but as a flame among embers. She brought her arts, her secrets, her mystery, and soon the Aesir needed her. Not for her charms alone, but for her knowledge. Her seiðr became the envy of Odin, who demanded to learn it, who sacrificed pieces of himself to master even a fraction of what Freya carried in her breath. But there were costs. The gods feared what they did not understand, and Freya understood everything. She walked their dreams. She saw their buried longings. She heard the lies they told themselves in silence. And they began to whisper. She is too powerful. She is not one of us. She makes men kneel and forget why they rose. Yet Freya remained, not humbled, not hardened. She remained radiant. She wandered the realms not to escape but to gather. Lovers, secrets, songs. She wept golden tears that hardened into amber. And those tears were not for herself. They were for what had been lost. For Vanaheim. For peace. For the days before love had to be defended. She searched endlessly for her husband, Oda, lost to time or will none could say. He vanished into the world, leaving only echoes and memory. Freya's sorrow was silent but deep. She did not wail. She wandered. She wore her longing like perfume sweet and unbearable, and from that pain she grew stronger. She ruled Folkvanger, her hall of the slain. While Odin took the brave into Valhalla, Freya chose her own. Half of those who fell in battle came to her not as warriors, but as souls. She welcomed them, not with shouts, but with open arms. Her hall Sessrumnir was not cold like the halls of war. It was warm, filled with music, laughter, and the memory of love lost and found. And still the world turned. Giants plotted. Mortals prayed. Gods played their games. And through it all, Freya moved like fire in the veins of the cosmos. Not loud, but present. She was not only beauty, she was the cost of beauty. She was not only love, she was the battle for love. And as Ragnarok stirred in distant shadows, as the roots of Yggdrasil groaned beneath the weight of endings, Freya stood at the edge of something greater, not afraid, not ready, but aware, because even the goddess of love must one day choose between desire and destiny. There are two kinds of beauty in the world, the kind that fades with a glance, and the kind that roots itself in memory, in blood, in truth so deep it becomes unbearable. Freya was the second. She did not shimmer like a surface. She haunted like a melody you could never unhear. And though the gods of Asgard welcomed her, they feared her more than they admitted. For Freya held a gift none of them truly understood, and power that none of them could unmake. That gift was seiðr, not merely magic, not tricks or illusions or charms. Seiðr was threadwork, the weaving of intention into reality, the bending of fates as a spinner bends flax. It did not ask, it rewrote, and Freya was its mistress. She sang to the wind, and it whispered back. She stroked the minds of men and gods alike, planting suggestions like seeds in thawing soil, not to control, to reveal. For seiðr did not force it unveiled what was already inside. Odin wanted it, so he humbled himself, casting off crown and name, to walk the world seeking her secrets. He bled for runes, hanged for wisdom, sacrificed an eye for a sip from Mimir's well, but it was Freya who taught him seiðr. It was she who unlocked the gates of fate and let him peer within. Yet the cost was never truly paid. For even as he learned, he felt shame. For in the ancient rites of seiðr, to submit was to open, and to open was in the eyes of the Aesir to become vulnerable. They called it unmanly, they called it dishonor. But Freya never flinched. She embraced the full spectrum of her power lover and fighter enchantress and strategist, tender and cruel. In her contradictions lived in harmony. She wore finery and fangs. She blessed fields and cursed cowards. She stood beside Frigg in council and sparred with Sif beneath the stars. Her place in Asgard was neither above nor below. She was apart, and in that distance she became more. But the gods in their pride always want more than they deserve, so they coveted her necklace Brisingamen, a jewel, not just of gold and craft, but of memory, forged by 4 dwarves in the secret depths of Nidavellir. Brisingamen held the essence of burning passion, endless longing, and ancient love. It was not merely ornament, it was Freya's soul made metal. It gleamed with every heartbeat she had ever offered, every night she had ever waited for Oda. It pulsed with power, and Loki, ever hungry for mischief and meaning, stole it. He did not do it for malice, but for madness, for curiosity, for challenge. And Freya, finding it gone, did not rage. She pursued. Through realms, through riddles, through illusions crafted to test her. She chased him not as a goddess, but as a woman who refused to be robbed of herself. And when she reclaimed it, placing Brisingamen once more upon her throat, it shimmered brighter than before. Because power reclaimed is always fiercer than power given. But something shifted in her then. She had once believed in connection, that love could bridge all gaps, that beauty could soften cruelty. But Loki's theft, Odin's hunger, the murmurs behind her back, these things carved new lines into her soul. She began to walk the halls of Asgard with quieter footsteps. She visited Vanaheim less. She smiled with greater care. She still loved. She still wept golden tears. But something in her had hardened. And so when giants came calling again, not with axes, but with offers, Freya was caught in a different trap. One day a stranger appeared at Asgard's gates. A builder cloaked and tall, claiming he could fortify the gods' walls in a single season. In return, he asked for Freya, as payment, as prize. The gods, laughing, agreed, certain he would fail. But Freya did not laugh. She watched. And when the builder neared completion, when the walls rose faster than nature should allow, the gods panicked. Thor was away. Time was short. And so they did what gods so often do. They turned to Loki. Fix it, they said. Undo what you made. And Loki, ever the shapeshifter, ever the answer to a question no one wanted to ask, became a mare lured away the builder's stallion and doomed the deal. Freya was spared, but not consulted, and when she heard what had happened, she said nothing. But the wind in Folkvanger stilled for 3 days, for even goddesses grow tired of being used. Even love grows weary when treated as currency, and in her silence a new truth took root. Freya began to see her role in the coming storm, not as victim, not as prize, but as force. The seiðr in her veins began to whisper more urgently. The Vanir in her soul began to stir, and somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the armor of beauty and the fire of grace, the warrior woke fully, not with swords, but with choice. For Freya had never been just one thing. She was not muse, not goddess of gentle kisses or harmless longing. She was love, yes, but love that dared, that fought, that sacrificed, that walked alone through ice and fire alike. She had given herself to Asgard for peace. She had taught Odin his deepest magic. She had opened her heart and watched it be bartered. Now she would remember. And as seers murmured of Fenrir's growing chains, of Jörmungandr's stirring coils, of the trees' slow groan, Freya gathered her strength. Because when the sky begins to fall, it is not thunder that decides the end. It is who stands when all others kneel. And Freya was rising. There are battles that roar with axes and thunder, and there are battles that begin with a whisper carried on breath, carved through memory. Freya's war was the second. No horn was blown, no sword unsheathed, yet every step she took from that day on rang with the weight of something broken and something awakening. As Asgard thickened with omens and Yggdrasil's branches groaned under prophecy's creeping weight, Freya stood at the edge of Folkvanger and looked westward. The fields she had once tended, fields filled with the laughter of warriors, the warm breath of lovers, the soft shimmer of golden grass, now stood hushed. The souls she had gathered, the ones who fell not in blind rage, but in love worth dying for, grew restless. They looked to her not as a goddess, but as leader. And in their silence she felt the turning of the world. Ragnarok was coming. She knew it not through runes or ravens, but through the wind that no longer carried song. The Vanir in her blood stirred. The seiðr she had passed to Odin whispered in foreign tones, threads she had once woven gently now tangled in her hands. It was not time yet, but it was close enough to see. Freya did not fear war. She had seen it, wielded it. She had loved warriors and buried them. What she feared, if anything, was what war would do to love. For in Ragnarok, all things would be torn open, truths, vows, longing. Even beauty, that divine illusion she wore like a veil, would be tested. Could love survive the end of gods? And so she journeyed, not to escape, but to remember. She walked the 9 realms in secret, cloaked not in illusion, but in self. In Midgard she wandered among humans, watching them clutch at fleeting affection like fire in frost. They did not know her name, but their children gave her flowers. Their women lit candles with her name half forgotten. She wept then, not for herself, but because they still believed in love even when the skies hinted at doom. Their hope was fragile, but it was true. In Alfheim, she found the light elves singing her praises in gardens where light lived forever. They offered her roses shaped from moonlight and songs spun from dew. But she saw their fear too, for even in beauty, even in peace, they had begun to vanish. The realms were unraveling, even purity had an end. In Svartalfheim, the dwarves had locked their forges. She descended into their caves alone. Brocka, once proud, now met her with a whisper. We've forged the last blade. We will forge no more. And in the dim glow of dying embers, she saw the blade he meant. It shimmered red, but not with flame, with memory. A sword to cut, not through flesh, but destiny. They offered it to her. She refused. Not yet, she said. In Helheim, she stood before Hel herself, daughter of Loki, ruler of the dead, who had no song. Freya and Hel did not speak at first, but the silence between them was not empty. It was echo. 2 women shaped by dismissal. 2 goddesses, never chosen, but always watching. Hel, pale and solemn, finally said, "The end comes for gods too." And Freya replied, "But not for what we stand for." Then she rose, and from the edge of death she turned east. Her last journey was to Vanaheim, her home. The realm of her birth had grown quiet. The Vanir no longer sang aloud. Their gods had aged not in body, but in trust. They saw her and wept, not in sorrow, but in pride. Njord, her father, kissed her brow. Freya, her brother, held her hand. "It is almost time," they said. And Freya nodded. She walked alone to the sacred lake where she had first summoned seiðr, where as a child she had once whispered to starlight and shaped it with laughter. There she let her tears fall not gold, but amber, and the ground drank them like wine. The lake shimmered, then split, and from its surface a vision rose of her chariot shattered, of her warriors, burning, of the necklace Brisingamen cracked and dimmed, and yet beneath it all was a new garden, not of gods, not of power, of rebirth. Freya saw it, and she smiled. She returned to Asgard with no trumpet, no fanfare, but when she stepped into the great hall, the wind shifted. Even Odin turned. He saw something in her, something he had once feared, then desired, and now respected. Freya was no longer just goddess of love. She was its last defender. As the sky began to dim, as wolves grew restless, and as Loki laughed from distant shadows, Freya stood at the edge of tomorrow. Brisingamen pulsed at her throat. Her seiðr curled in her palms. And though the world may burn, love would walk into the fire, because Freya would lead it there. Ragnarok did not arrive with silence. It thundered into the 9 realms, with the howling of wolves, the shattering of chains, and the skies torn open like wounds. Fenrir, no longer bound, roared across the horizon, his jaws wide enough to devour the sun. Jörmungandr, the world's serpent, rose from the seas, coiling around Midgard as the oceans boiled. Muspelheim erupted as Surtur marched his flaming sword, cleaving the heavens. And above it all, Yggdrasil trembled, roots split, branches broken, time unraveling. But even as the gods readied their arms, even as Odin saddled Sleipnir, and Thor grasped Mjolnir, for the final time it was Freya who stood first, not behind them, not beside, but ahead, at the gate, where destiny meets defiance. She wore no armor, she wore purpose. Brisingamen still shimmered against her skin, cracked now, glowing faintly. Her hair was not braided for war. It flowed wild in the wind, streaked with the dust of every realm she had walked. And her eyes, those storm-filled mirrors, did not reflect fear. They reflected everything. She rode into the final war, not with a trumpet, but with a whisper on her lips. Her chariot, pulled by her great cats, leapt over flame, through frost into fire. And behind her came not only warriors of Asgard, but her chosen those of Folkvanger, the dead who had fallen for love, for peace, for honor. Their blades were bright, their spirits unbroken. They followed her like constellations pulled from the grave. Odin rode to meet Fenrir, Thor to Jörmungandr, Tyr to Garm. But Freya faced the emptiness, because as the world crumbled, the true battle was not just blood and death, it was meaning. As Loki unleashed his chaos, laughing even as the fire scorched his skin, even as the gods he had once loved fell around him, Freya met him not with fury, but with a gaze that stopped his heart. "You were always searching," she said. Loki grinned through pain. "And you were always waiting." "No," she said, stepping forward. "I was becoming." And she lifted her hand, not in curse, not in destruction, but in mercy. And for the briefest second, Loki's mask cracked. Not the trickster, not the liar. Just a soul too broken to believe in forgiveness. But she gave it anyway, because Freya was love. And love chooses even when the world doesn't deserve it. As the realms burned, the sky collapsed and Surtur's blade fell. Freya turned once to Odin, to Frigg, to Sif, to her brother Freya, who had already fallen, and finally, to the world she had walked, wept for, and protected. She closed her eyes and let the light within her burn. It was not the light of the sun. It was the light of every vow ever kept, every hand held, every name whispered in devotion. And in that final blaze, when the fire met the sea and the gods fell screaming into ash, Freya became the only flame that did not die. She carried it through, when the smoke cleared, when the tree had fallen, when the stars had vanished. There was a garden, small, silent, but living. And in that garden a new sun rose. Two human figures stood, Leif and Lifthrasir, survivors of a world undone. They did not know Freya's name. They did not know the names of gods or giants, but they felt her in every petal, every drop of morning dew, every heartbeat that dared to believe. Freya did not return. She had become the breath of the new world. She was no longer a goddess. She was memory. She was longing. She was the reason to begin again. And as the new world opened its eyes, somewhere deep beneath fresh soil, where the last drop of amber had fallen, a flower bloomed. Beautiful, bright, unbreakable. Freya,